Hello, everyone. On behalf of the MIT Alumni Golfers Association and MIT, I'd like to welcome you to our program today on golf course architecture. We're honored to have Tom Doak and Brian Zager join us for our discussion. My name is Kim Din. I am the Vice President of the MIT Alumni Golfers Association, and Jeff Phillips will be hosting the Q&A session and the interviews with Tom and Brian, and he is a board member also of the MIT Alumni Golfers Association. So just brief info, bios on Tom and Brian. Tom Doak started his college career at MIT and then transferred to Cornell to study landscape architecture, and ultimately traveled in the UK for 2 years, researching some of the best golf courses as he prepared for a career in golf. And so over the past few decades, Tom has been a leader in the minimalist school of design as he has designed and restored courses around the world. Brian Zager provides golf design related services to clients and is an independent golf design associate for Tom Doak. He creates mods for racing computer simulation games in his spare time and enjoys working in the golf course architecture business and applying his technical background to the field. Jeff, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Kim. And yeah, Tom, appreciate you taking the time again. Definitely under different circumstances than right before the November 2020 Masters. And Brian, excited to chat with you. I guess I want to start by talking about the first project that you two worked on together in Wisconsin, which I think is of interest to this group, given the unique technology of it. So what made the build of the Lido in Sand Valley unique?
Well, I'll start a little bit. For years, I'd talked to people, and one client in particular, Mike Kaiser, who is keenly interested in this old golf course on Long Island, Lido Golf Club, that Charles Blair Macdonald had built basically during World War I. It was completely created from it's on the barrier strip between the Atlantic Ocean and the Intercoastal, and it was kind of swampy land, and it was completely created from scratch by dredging material out of the Intercoastal and building up dunes and contours according to a model that he built of the golf course. And in the 1920s, when golf course architecture started attracting attention, the Lido is considered one of the best golf courses in the United States. But in the 30s, it suffered during the Depression. In 1941, it was turned into a naval training base, and a lot of the golf course was scraped and changed, and it never really went back. They did build a new public version a mile away from that golf course, but what's on that golf course now is a high school and housing. And part of the reason for that too is that there was a public road going through it, which in 1918 was not a big deal, but by 1940 they could see the handwriting on the wall that hitting balls over the road on 4 holes was not going to be viable long term. And if you look at a map of the place today and where it was, you can see that would not have survived. But it was considered a great golf course, and because it had been kind of built from scratch, there was this idea floating around that, hey, we should build a new version of that. And I was approached about it 15 or 20 years ago by Mike Kaiser for a new course at Bandon. And at the time, I told him I didn't think it really fit that site. And that we didn't, if you were going to name something after the Lido, it should really be an accurate representation of what was there. And we didn't have enough information to do it. And that site wasn't really suited to doing that. So that's how we wound up doing the project that's called Old McDonald at Bandon Dunes instead. I basically said, we can do what Seth Rayner did for McDonald and take all his ideas for golf holes and just fit them to the site that we had. And that's what we tried to do for Old McDonald. And then coming out of the pandemic, I was supposed to do a new resort project for Sand Valley for for Mike and his son, Michael. And they put the brakes on that during the pandemic. And while they were taking a break, Michael had been thinking about doing a version of the Lido on ground across the street from the resort. He didn't think it made sense. Originally, he was just going to do some very big, like 20-acre housing lots over there. But then he decided maybe he could do a private course along with it. And since the ground was really flat, he got interested in doing the Lido. And he called me about it. And I said, I'd be interested because a guy named Peter Flory in the meantime had done a very good computer model rendering of the golf course for a game. But I was skeptical that, I still didn't know how all the inputs to the game worked and whether we could take that, whether there's any way to take that and pull a plan out of it that we could work off of. And so I kind of left that open question to Michael, and a month or two later, he called me and said, well, we found somebody over here that thinks they can do that and, pull a map out of this game. And that's where Brian Zager comes into the picture. So I'll let him pick it up from there.
So yeah, I was I guess I'll tell a little bit of my backstory. First, I was born and raised in Wisconsin Rapids, which is just 15 miles from the Sand Valley Resort. And I had been interested in golf architecture from a very young age and building golf courses for computer games just as a hobby for a long time, and interested in the real world architecture and golden age architecture, and read a lot of Tom's stuff on the Golf Club Atlas website that he posted, and just always was really interested in it. And I never thought of it as a career. I got this amazing opportunity that Mike Kaiser wanted to build a resort about 15 miles away from where I lived, and I wanted to get involved in any way I could. And early on, it was mostly just doing some topo maps for the site and helping them out with a few things here and there that were technology related, like rendering some things. But eventually I got this really big break where they wanted to do the Lido. And as Tom mentioned, Peter Flory had done a model of the Lido in the game, in the PGA 2K21 game. And I should also add that prior to this, for a little while, I had made golf courses for simulators as a side job. So I had never actually worked with this particular game, but I had a lot of experience in making courses for games, figuring out how to go back and forth between creating, taking real world data, LiDAR data, and putting it into games and rendering and all this stuff. So I got an email from Craig Haltom, who's with Oliphant Golf Construction. I had worked with him in the past and in the mapping for Sand Valley, and he asked me, is there any way you can create a topo map out of this model that Peter Flory created of the Lido? And I was obviously super interested. First of all, I heard of the Lido and knew a little bit about it, and it was a shock to me. Oh, they're going to try and make it here at Sand Valley. Wow. Okay. Yeah, I'm definitely interested in any way I can help with that. And so he put me in touch with Peter, and Peter sent me his file for the course, but I had never done anything with this particular game before. So I really had no idea how I was going to get it out of there and make it into something, that we could use. And I just, so that's why I told him, I'll definitely give it a shot, see if I can figure anything out. No promises, but hopefully figure something out. And all the software that I had used in the past for simulators or other games usually let you export out, a file that would, like triangulated irregular mesh that would, allow you to just, bring it into CAD software or GIS software and create topo maps out of it. But this particular game did not let you do that. It was completely proprietary, and I reached out to one guy that I knew who had actually kind of reverse engineered a way to import LiDAR data into this game, because I figured he knew something about how the internals of the file structure worked. And he was able to help me out a little bit and told me that the game actually saved every action that the user created as like a list of, he raised this spot 1 foot and painted, this area 20 inches higher or whatever. It just saves this list of actions and then recreates the golf course for the user playing the game every time from that list of actions, which is an insane way to save all this work, in my opinion. But I think the reason they did that is this is one of the first games that actually stored all the golf courses out on the game developer's server, instead of you just, like downloading it from websites and having it on your personal computer. So I think they did it this way to try and save on memory storage for all these golf courses that the users created. And so, okay, now how am I going to recreate, a topo map from, I would have to, they have like 50 different brush sizes for painting elevation changes, and to reverse engineer every single one of those would be impossible. But the guy who did this LiDAR tool actually did reverse engineer one tool, and he was like manipulating the file so that it would paint like individual spots in every 1 meter, so that you could get data into this game. Well, I'm trying to get data out of this game now, so I had to think about what's the best way to go about doing this. And I came up with a plan to write auto hotkey script to take control of a measuring tool within the game and actually record points the fastest I could get it to go was 5 points a second, and space it out in a grid of however, I think we maybe did it at, it would have took so long to do it, at like 1 meter spacing, or just kind of a standard for what I was creating maps for. It would have taken so long that we couldn't do the entire golf course at 1 meter, but I did like the entire thing at maybe, I don't remember, 15 feet spacing, and then just the greens and the surrounds of the greens. And so I created this script, take control of the mouse, click all these points, and then once I also had to have the file save every 10 minutes and delete all the points, because if it got more than however many points it would click in 10 minutes, it'd start to slow down and crash the game. So I also automated saving the file, clearing the points, and then continuing on. And so I generated all these files with all these points in it, and then I wrote a Python script to pull all the points out of 150 different file saves, and then took those points, put it into a GIS software. Global Mapper is the software I used for that, and treated it as if it was LiDAR, generated a terrain grid from it, and then turned it into a topo map for Tom, and then sent that off. And this entire time, I had never even met Tom yet. I was just working with Craig and Michael Kaiser, and didn't know what was going to happen with it after that. But that was my first introduction to this project.
That's amazing, Brian. I feel like you just like live the dream. I mean, I think about as a kid, like drawing golf courses on, in textbooks, and like in building them in video games, and actually then, using all of your skills to export that to get to this next step is just so
Yeah.
cool.
It all kind
Um,
of came together in such a amazing way. You wouldn't write a movie script and believe that that would happen. You know, I did all these things as a hobby as a kid and never, and, you know, and later in college and then did a little bit of side work, you know, as a contractor for a simulator company, but never really thought that that was a career. Certainly not getting into real golf architecture, and circumstances just happened to take me there, and I'm so thankful for that.
So how long did it take from when you first started digging into the game to having that export that was you can share with Tom?
It took about 2 months, I think, but it wasn't like I was working on it, you know, 8 hours
Yeah.
a day, every day. I was also, at that time, I was working like 5 hours a day for like 4 days a week at Sand Valley on the grounds crew. Because I had, I used to work for a technology company, Renaissance Learning, who made educational software, K-12 educational software. I was a QA there, and I had quit that job probably about 4 years before this, and just because it was a great company to work for, but I was getting kind of bored with making, you know, educational software. I wanted to do something I was interested in, so I tried to do the courses for simulators thing as a full-time job, and it didn't fully work out. So I was also working as on the grounds crew on the side at this point. And so I kind of got off track there, but I would say I put in maybe 10 hours of it a week for 2 months. Maybe not even that much, probably 5 hours a week for 2 months, you know, just trying to fit it in when I had time and see if I could, you know. And I interacted with this guy who had done this LiDAR tool for that game as well. So I was waiting to hear back from him for a few things and just trying to figure out how am I going to make this work, writing some scripts. And yeah, so it was quite a while. I really didn't think for a long time that we were going to be able to make it happen, and then eventually it all worked.
Yeah, going from one Renaissance to another. So
Yeah,
Tom,
yeah, that's kind of funny.
when you first I guess got this manufactured topo map, like did it make sense, or were there things where it's like, oh, that can't be right, or did it seem like this represented a golf course that would have been designed 100 years ago with
Well,
this
I've worked,
thing?
I've done consulting work on a bunch of McDonald courses, so I know the style pretty well. I've never, I had never tried to draw a grading plan like that from scratch. I have done like 2 or 3 other projects over the years where we started from just a dead flat site to create something. And so you have to draw contours for wall-to-wall 200 acres of what you're going to do. And, the way I learned to do it was not a digital map like Brian's working on now that's really exact, but just like a 2-foot contour grading plan of what you want the contours to be. And there's so much lost in between the lines of a 2-foot contour map. It's like all the cool little green contours on a golf course are just tiny little squiggle on the map that wouldn't mean anything to you if you didn't, you can teach yourself to read it if you have the map and you go out and see the green and you see, okay, that little squiggle does that on the ground. But to actually try to draw something, to create something from scratch that way, okay, I want this little squiggle right here, is very hard to do. But when I saw Brian's map, just instantly the first thought was, well, that's closer than I could have tried to draw it from scratch myself. The scale of it made sense to me. It's going to be right in 2D. We've got good aerial photos of the thing. We know exactly how long the holes were and where the bunkers were and all that. It's the 3D part that's so hard. And there were just a few things I recognized that I saw in Brian's plan that made sense to me that I didn't think that he or Peter would have really known to put in there if they were just trying to fake me. It's like, one is that a lot of McDonald's courses, especially the par threes, the greens are all kind of built up, and then you don't really see anything over the back of the green. It's what we call an infinity green. So you're seeing over the horizon of the putting surface, and the next thing you see maybe 200 yards away or half a mile away or something else, there's a bunch of low ground that you can't see. And all of the par threes on the plan that Brian had spit out, the green was just about 4 or 5 feet eye level height above the tee. So you're going to get that effect. I never really thought about what creates that effect. It's being exactly that elevation above, where your eye level is just going over that green and everything below it is lost. And then there was another thing, when we were working on Old McDonald, the greenkeeper for the National Golf Links in the Hamptons took me around there and showed me a handful of places. The National and the Lido were both built in the early 1900s, before even steel shafts in golf clubs, and when the best players in the country really only hit the ball 180 or 200 yards most of the time. And he showed me places at the National where McDonald had kind of like deliberately put in a little flat spot 180 to 200 yards out, and then another one for a second shot to get yourself in if you can get it in this little area, this is the perfect place, and you get a better look at the rest of the hole in front of you. And I saw that on the 17th hole at the Lido in Brian's map, and I know he didn't know anything about that. And I thought, okay, I believe this is pretty close to what's there, or that feature wouldn't be there.
Yeah, that's really cool. And how do you think about, I guess, how faithful were you to what Brian produced versus using your own intuition or creativity to make adjustments?
Very close in a lot of senses. So there's one caveat. The original Lido golf course was on 115 acres, and some of the holes are really close to each other and really dangerous. And if we'd have built exactly that, the first time somebody got hit by a golf ball, I'd be in court and they would say, well, why did you put the holes so close together? And I would say, well, because they did it that way 100 years ago. And they would say, but didn't you think that was unsafe? And I would say, yes. And that would be the end of the project. So, we had to space stuff further apart. So after I got Brian's map, the next thing I did was like cut and space holes a little further apart to make sure there weren't any serious safety problems. And, that gave us the chance to put in some extra back tees that didn't exist on the original golf course. Which was good, because the original golf course was only built at 6,400 yards, and that's good for member play, but it wouldn't have been good if they'd wanted to host a tournament or anything more than that. So we had to go through that process and then try to figure out, what to fill the gaps with, essentially, which was interesting. We would wind up, so say there was a green that was too close to another fairway, we'd move that hole out of the way, but that green might have had a bunker off the side of it that was in play on the other hole. So we mimicked that and built more bunkers inside, so they were still the right distance from the other hole, and yet the hole that was a safety problem was 50 feet or 75 feet further away. So that was a trick and took some time. But when we started building it, we were also all really curious to see, there are bulldozers now that have GPS built into them, and you can actually, once you get the thing really, the operator kind of gets it close, but the last pass of the bulldozer is basically on autopilot, Brian's moving his hand, so he's got something to say. It's not always that simple.
Oh, yeah, I do have something to say, but that was actually because somebody opened my door and I had to say, go away for now.
Oh, okay, sorry.
But I do have something to say. I want to say, at the very beginning, when we started construction, we didn't even know really about the GPS. Craig asked me if I wanted to go out there with just a GPS rover and flag contours throughout the winter while we first started building this, and just, tell the operator, okay, it's got to go up 2 feet or down a foot or whatever it needed to go in certain places, so that they would have some general idea. And we didn't really even know about the GPS stuff until like we had started construction in late November of 2020. I think that's right. Years fly by. And by February is when we first found out about this GPS technology. And it actually happened because a guy who was a contractor happened to be wandering out onto our site. It's like an 80-year-old guy. You'd passed this company down to his sons or something, but he happened to live in the area and he knew something was going on out here. And he approached me and the dozer operator one day when it was like 10 degrees Fahrenheit out, the coldest day of the year that winter, and said, hey, you guys could really do this a lot easier if you had GPS on the bulldozer to actually build it out. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'll forward that idea up the chain and we'll find out where that goes. And sure enough, in 2 weeks, we had a dozer out there with GPS demoing what it can do. It turned out to be from another company. I don't know what happened between those 2 weeks. I suppose they probably found somebody with a better price or something. But in any case, the first day we had a guy on it in shaping the 17th fairway, and we recognized right away, oh yeah, this is gonna make it go a lot easier, a lot faster, and a lot closer to the model that we had built.
That's really cool. And yeah, I mean, I think about, I don't know, I wonder, Tom, how do you think about the creativity of building the Lido versus old map? Like, I mean, there are different forms of creativity or versus original design. Yeah, just how do you think about those?
Yeah, well, a very different process for me. I mean, when I'm designing a course on my own, I can sort of do anything I want. And, I'm known for trying to leave as much of the natural contour in the picture and use it as part of the whole as I can. And just working on little, building greens, building tees, building bunkers, but not really changing the grades on the fairway so much if I don't have to. Even for Old McDonald, where I was taking another architect's ideas, and McDonald had a very strong idea of he'd learned golf in Scotland, and he picked what he thought were the best holes over there. And his whole idea of golf course architecture was bringing those holes and concepts to America and improving the standard of golf in America. So very clear ideas of what kind of holes we wanted to build. And then, so the exercise at Old McDonald was just finding the best place on the site to fit those holes and make them fit together. Lido is entirely different. I mean, once we got past the stage of spreading the holes out and trying to make everything fit together in a new site, there really wasn't much for me to do architecturally. It was all a matter of just building the golf course the way it was supposed to be built. And the only place where we had to wing it was the first couple of greens that we built. To me, looked flatter than the McDonald greens that I know, or at least the best of them, the greens at the National Golf Links or Chicago Golf Club. And, I asked Peter Flory directly, like, how good do you think your information was for these greens? And of course, he'd tried to get all this stuff not off a real LiDAR map, because the golf course isn't there anymore, but off a bunch of old photos. And black and white photos, you can only tell so much. And he very quickly volunteered, no, I wouldn't go with, you go with what you think. Don't take the last 6 inches of my computer game model as the last word on what these greens were like. So, once we heard that, we did get back on the greens. There's a few that came straight out of the model, the second green, if it didn't come straight out of the model, I doubt anyone would have let me build it on my own. It's very severe. It's huge and it's got very wild internal contours. And, you know, normally when I try to do that in front of a client, they want me to tone it down. So it's much easier when you can say, well, that's what the computer said McDonald did. So you got to say it's okay.
Cool. There were, I was going to say, there were a lot of spots that we looked at the model that Peter had done and compared it to an aerial from 1926 as well. And we saw in the 26 aerial that there were light colored areas and dark colored areas. The light colored areas we figured were high because they dried out and the darker colored areas were more lush. And plus these areas also kind of matched pretty closely what the plasticine model that McDonald had made showed. So we figured they built it pretty close to this. So another thing, so, you know, once we had the GPS dozer going, I actually myself a job because I wasn't be able to flag contours anymore. But luckily I worked with Brian Schneider and Brian Slonik as they were shaping some edits out there, and we looked at the photos and looked where Peter was, you know, maybe a foot or two or more off in certain places, and I flagged places to modify it a little bit, and eventually I actually got in there and changed the computer model as well, and we had some GPS work done that was actually what I had modeled too.
Yeah, well, you definitely did put yourself out of a job. Seems like you got yourself another job. So
yes.
I understand the two of you are working on a course now in South Florida using the same technology and trying to bring elements of North Berwick in Scotland, Pine Valley, to very flat ground in Florida. Is that more like old Mac, where you're just taking something great from elsewhere and interpreting it and putting it somewhere else? Or how do you think about what you're building there in Florida?
Well, after seeing the technology at Lido and what we were able to create based on a computer model, you know, I had always been skeptical of you know, computerized plans being the last word in design. For one thing, I don't know anything about making computerized plans. You know, there's not many people. It's one thing to use it to shape stuff. It's another thing to be able to draw it or create it on a computer, whatever method you use to do that, and have it turn out, you know, and understand what you're doing well enough that it turns out on the ground like you want it to. But what I did see at Lido was some undulations and fairways that look like links courses overseas that, you know, I work with some of the best shapers in the world to create golf courses, but it takes them a lot of time and trial and error to get that stuff. And if you can actually borrow it from somewhere else, that's an interesting concept. So when we did that, right after we finished Lido, we started that resort course for Sand Valley called Sedge Valley that's just opening. And Michael Kaiser encouraged me. Sedge Valley has a lot of really good natural undulation. It did have 2 or 3 holes on pretty flat stretches. And Michael was like, instead of just building a flattish hole, why don't you jazz it up and use the technology that you used at Lido? So we tried that for one hole, the 18th hole at Sedge Valley. You know, it kind of, when I laid it out, it kind of reminded me a little bit of a hole I'd built in Australia at Barnbougle Dunes. You know, so I had Brian grab the GPS info for that, and we actually built a new version of that hole. It comes across as very different because that hole is in the sand dunes and there's all kinds of natural vegetation around it and bigger dunes away from the golf hole that we weren't trying to replicate. But the actual golf hole fit very well. And, you know, we moved a bit of dirt in order to get it right, but we were really pleased with the result. So at the same time, I'd been hired by a client in Florida to do a new course on a dead flat piece of ground. It's between the St. Lucie Canal, which kind of connects part of the system that connects the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico through Lake Okeechobee. It's about a 400-foot wide canal that pleasure boats and barges, and there's not a ton of traffic, but something interesting goes through there every day. And a 2-lane highway that runs from Port St. Lucie to Indiantown. And there's a bunch of golf courses being developed along that stretch right now. And our project is not real estate related at all. It's just 220 acres for a golf course between the road and the canal, which is a fairly long, skinny strip. And we had to completely create stuff from scratch. And the client's goal is to build one of the 3 best golf courses in Florida. And I just thought, well, the odds of me just designing something completely from scratch and having anybody think it's that good are pretty remote. But instead of starting with Charles Blair McDonald's idea of what are the best golf holes he's seen around the world, I could start with some of my own. I've had a file in my desk for 40 years of like really cool holes on flattish ground that could be adapted to this. So I started thinking, okay, how could we fit some of these into this land? And really, a lot of the purpose of this was to take all the tech that Brian's used and see how many different ways we could use it in the course of building 18 holes and what we liked and what we didn't. So we have holes where I kind of designed a semi-original hole, but to do just sampled contours from a golf course in England that had the kind of roll that we wanted for the fairways. We have other holes that are closer copies of holes from a couple of my own courses, 2 or 3 courses in Scotland, and even Pine Valley in New Jersey. Where Pine Valley is a much hillier site than what we started with in Florida. So we didn't do that to the full elevations. We aren't playing 40 feet up a hill. We're playing 20 or 25. But the scale of the earth moving is similar to the Lido. We're making 20-foot fills in places and 10-foot, 15-foot cuts. And the good thing about the one thing this client did find in Florida was usually when you're cutting into the ground, no matter how sandy it is, you'll hit water table pretty fast in Florida. So once you dig a hole 6 feet deep, it's a lake. And he didn't want that. So he'd spent a lot of time trying to find the highest, driest ground he could. And this site is about 10 feet above the canal at its highest. So we could go down 6 or 7 feet and still be dry and, build the golf course down into the ground a little bit as well as above, instead of just bringing in fill from somewhere and building it all above. But we have tried almost every combination we could from a pretty much dead-on exact copy of the 11th hole at St. Andrews, which I think is the best par 3 in the world, to another par 3 that's totally original because there was only one place on the site that had any natural vegetation. There was a cluster of little trees along the canal, and I had this, on our computer plan, we had a par 4 playing right through those. I was like, I can't take those down. Let's design around those instead. So we changed 2 of the holes to fit that little space. And, the 5th hole, the par 3, is one of my favorite holes. And that was just me and Eric Iverson kind of winging it for a day and a half, building a hole from scratch. But most of the rest of the golf course is very much borrowed contours from other places. And then on top of that, Florida is very strict about drainage and runoff regulations. Basically, we can't let any rainwater that hits that site surface drain straight into that canal. Even as polluted as that canal probably is, we have to catch it all, have it in detention basins for a while, let that soak into the ground so no fertilizer goes straight into the open water.
Yeah.
And to do that, they want a 6-inch grading plan of your golf course, which would be impossible to do from scratch unless you're doing what we were and kind of, doing a computerized grading plan anyway. So it worked out to be the right place to try this. And our client, since we, he was all on board at the beginning, and then he got really cold feet about, oh, are people going to think it's a replica course? So he doesn't want us talking about this. So nobody write a headline tomorrow that
Yeah.
Tom Doak building a replica course in Florida. I don't want to hear about it when I go back there next week.
Yeah.
Well,
It doesn't sound
but we
like
do have some holes that are pretty close copies of famous golf holes. And I'm amazed. I've had a bunch of people out there during construction kind of looking at what I'm doing, and even people that are members of some of these golf courses, and you'll show it to them and they don't recognize it. And you'll say, well, this is kind of based on the 12th hole at Ballyneal where you're a member. And they'll look at it and say, oh yeah, I can kind of see that, but this part isn't the same, is it? And like, yes, it is. It's pretty much exactly the same. There's something in the human brain that just doesn't want that to be true.
Right. And then it kind of goes back to McDonald again, where it's like, how many cape holes are there? And so you see them again and again. And unless you're really tuned into it, you might not observe that they're the same, even though it's, so
I do believe if Charles Blair McDonald had this technology and had Brian Zager helping him, he would have reproduced those holes from the links courses as exactly as he could have. They just didn't have anything close to the ability to do that. McDonald was the only person on the job that had ever seen any of those holes. And he had a golfer's memory for them. He didn't have a detailed blueprint memory for all of them. Mm-hmm. So, he did something good enough for what he could do at the time. Nowadays it's possible to do, I think we've convinced ourselves it's possible to reproduce almost anything you want to an inch of perfect if you really want to. And now the question is, what do we do with that? I mean, it's not just Brian putting himself out of a job. I'd be putting all the shapers I work with out of jobs. I'd be putting myself out of a job. You could pick 18 holes you liked and say, let's go build that. And you could. And it's like, is this what we want golf course architecture to become? No, it's not. So we're walking on a tightrope here. And I eventually will let us talk about that because it's a conversation we really need to have.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're using technology to support naturalism and to some extent minimalism, though. It's ultimately, if you push this a little bit further, it's the opposite of that. It is just rebuilding things, and you can make it work no matter if it fits the setting or not. So
exactly. I mean, on a good piece of land, you wouldn't want to recontour everything wall to wall. You'd want to, pick your spots and, recreate a green or give more contour to a fairway or whatever. But that's where it gets harder, because trying to tie something else in with the natural contours that are there, takes a lot of work around the margins to get it right. I'll let Brian speak to that a little bit.
Well, I don't think it's that hard, because you just need to get a LiDAR data scan of what you got out there already. And then you can take that into the computer and edit that from there and do the things you want to do to that. And it should all tie in at the edges where you make the changes real nice. I mean, it might not be perfect, and you might have to do a little bit of editing in the field, but it's a lot. It's not, I don't think it's that difficult to, make edits to existing good land. And you don't have to build everything from scratch. If you're going this way, you can.
Right.
And I did a lot of work, pulling all the LiDAR for this project we're doing, and then we did have a lot of work to tie everything together on our project, because we were pulling data from almost 18 different golf courses. and making that puzzle fit together, figuring out what the right elevation to set the holes at, figuring out how we need to change them in order to make it fit with adjacent elevations. And so, yes, there was a lot of work on this project to tie in all of those holes together and make it feel like one cohesive golf course. And, one of the tricks I used was if you put two holes next to each other and then just cut the line right down the side of it, it's, and one of them has a lot bigger contour features than the other, then it's going to look real obvious that that's what you did. So one of the ways that I used to try and make it less obvious to the eye was to cut that at an angle down so that some of the features of one golf hole spilled into the other, and you didn't see this hard edge where all of a sudden everything is changing to a different kind of a landscape here. And so that's one of the used. And there was certainly a bunch of other things, a bunch of just modeling little contours in between the holes to make it, because a really important thing is, that you don't just have dead flat space in, even though there's areas of the golf course that are not important, they're not in play or anything, but you still have to have it feel like it. In order to make it feel like it was there already, you have to have interesting contouring everywhere. So, modeling some of these dead spaces, putting some of my own contouring work into that was also an important part of making it feel like it all fit together, I think.
Yeah. Well, I could keep asking you questions, but there are lots of good questions from some of the audience. So Kim, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay. Yeah, looks like a few questions. We'll just go in order. This one's a quick one, I think, from Greg Turner. He says he sees a hand drafting table behind Tom. Do you hand draw your designs?
I do, although my drawings are not very complicated at all. I mean, sometimes it's just as simple as drawing the center line of where the tee and the fairway and the green go. And we up till now, I've relied on working with my own team in the field to do the shaping of the greens and bunkers, and I don't try to draw those exactly in advance. I think of that like sculpture, and it's something that you want to do on site instead of here. And this is one of the things, I'm sure Brian's approach to design, if he takes off on his own one day and starts doing this, he'll be sculpting stuff in the computer. I'd still rather do it on the ground with a guy that's been a friend of mine for 25 years, but it might not be as efficient.
Yeah, I think that my approach would be to sculpt it depends on the site, obviously, but my approach would be to sculpt a lot at the beginning in the computer and then still work with somebody in the field to edit. You still got to be there and make sure, yes, this is what I want. This looks right. And there's still certain features that you can't get exactly right without, the bunker styles, for example. You got to have somebody on site to build those the way you want to build them.
Okay, perfect. Sally and Phil Robinson just wanted to say they were absolutely loving the combination of nerdy tech and golf course design by brilliant people.
We specialize in that now.
Yeah.
A question from Jim Love. Were there any significant differences or challenges to designing St. Patrick's links at Rosa Penna versus Old McDonald or the course at Sand Valley? Is the links land in County Donegal substantially different than that at Bandon? Who's thinking about regulatory differences between Ireland and the US in particular?
Well, the big difference in Ireland is you cannot, most of the dunes / links ground in Ireland is protected as a special area of conservation by the EU, and you cannot anymore build a new golf course in undeveloped ground. The only reason St. Patrick's was able to work out is somebody had built a golf course there in the early 2000s, and it was essentially laying fallow. But when they drew the special areas of conservation, when the EU was formed, they drew the red line right around the fence of the project and accepted it out because it was a golf course. So we could basically go in there and build like we did in Bandon. But it's not just, you know, the UK is separate because they've always had, even before they exited the EU, they insisted on being able to do their own environmental regulations, and that's why Trump was able to build his course 10 years ago. But Ireland and the rest of the EU, it's almost impossible to build anything in sand dunes now. It's all protected.
Great. Next question from David Guterman. Are you using AI for any design? Can you read spatial maps, photographs, or in text, or previously constructed or naturally occurring land water features to aid design? He had some ideas and AI astute colleagues interested in this.
I am sure there are a lot of very smart people that would like to apply AI to golf course design. I'm a Luddite on that. You know, you have to remember, I went to school at MIT in 1979 when computer technology was not quite as advanced. and I appreciate that it's come so far, but you know, at the end of the day, one of the things I like about my job is working outdoors. So I do it the way I do it. You know, I've had people say to me, boy, if we could only get all of your techniques and the way you do things into a computer program, then we could build a lot more great golf courses. I don't know how you do that, but maybe one of these days somebody will figure it out.
Well, we're back to putting ourselves out of jobs again here, potentially. I'm definitely interested in where AI is going and how it could potentially be used. But, you know, a lot of the fun of my job would be solving, you know, Tom likes to do this too, solving the puzzle of routing a course on a piece of land. And I'm sure we could get AI to do that, but I don't know if I really want AI to do that. I want to do that, you know, so but, you know, there's certain ways that I haven't thought about it a lot yet, but I think there's certain ways that AI will be interesting to apply to this field.
Okay, excellent. A question from Tim at Uni. Do you now use the gaming technology to iterate green design so you simulate how it would play and then up with something wonderfully unique, but not so crazy it can result in cruel and unusual punishment? Brian, it seems like you played with some contouring at least.
So, yes, I have done that. And the third green that we have out here at our golf course we're building in Florida, we started with LiDAR data, but then I went through and thought about what I thought would be interesting for the contouring for this green and changed everything up and built something. I had gotten a few comments from Tom about what he thought maybe the green should be like way back, you know, at the start of the project. And I thought, well, I'll take some of those and then I'll run with it and I'll shape it like as if I was one of the shapers that he was telling what to do, and do that in the computer and see how it comes out. And for the most part, we pretty much used what I modeled out in the computer. We kept most of it. We changed the shape of the green a little bit. We took a little bit of the front section away that I designed, but I absolutely think that was a really cool way to. And going to what you said, when I was designing the green, I was getting into the game and I was hitting putts and seeing if it was doing what I wanted to do. Tom can do that in his head without even having to, because he's been doing this for so long. But for me, you know, it's actually helpful to get in there in the game, hit a few putts, see if it's doing what I think it needs to be doing. And it came out that we didn't change it much from what I did. So I think it's absolutely a good way to go about doing it. You know, there's multiple ways to get to great results, and I think that's one of them.
Yeah, Kim, I should say too that, I mean, actually the first application of this technology to golf course design is rebuilding old golf courses. You know, there are tons of clubs in the States that they want to rebuild their set of greens to new, better construction standards. So they want to replicate the green exactly like it is, or they want to replicate it, but take a little of the tilt out of it, because greens are a lot faster now than they were when they were built 100 years ago. And actually, a friend of mine that I worked with for the Dies 40 years ago is one of the guys that started doing like really detailed mapping of greens and rebuilding them that way. And he came out to Sabonic when we were building it and surveyed my first green and told me, you know, if the pin is in this part of the green and you hit it to the back of the green there's no way you can make a putt. He'd run simulations on it and proven that there was no way you could make a putt. And I was like, who says I want you to be able to make a putt from back there? As long as you could get it within a couple of feet, I'm fine.
Fair point. And the next question from Tanner: if he wanted to switch careers in his late 20s to the field of golf course architecture, what would be the first steps you would take to make that happen? Assuming no experience other than a technical background and drawing golf courses as a kid.
Well, I would say you should talk to Brian. And I mean, there, like we've been talking about today, I think there is room for somebody with like no background, but very smart tech skills to kind of forge their own path in this. You know, my advice to people for years is the most important thing to understand is how these golf courses are built and, you know, the artistry that goes into that. So I've always encouraged people to get into the construction side of it, at least some, to understand A, what's possible, B, what's fun about it. And, you know, be able to connect drawing plans to actually what gets built in the field. And so you're comfortable going back and forth and you know what you're doing all the time. I still think that's a big part of it. But, you know, there are a lot of young people, you know, when I was in school 40 years ago, you know, when I decided on my 18th birthday, hey, I might want to transfer out of MIT and pursue this as a career, it was very hard to find any information about what to do or where to go. The few books about golf course architecture that were written by the old dead architects were out of print for 50 years and collector's items and impossible to find. You know, compared to then, there's like a million times more podcasts, websites, books about golf course architecture to learn about, you know, to learn the basics. And then the other most important thing is to go see what great golf courses are and what they look like and why, you know, figure out why they're so good. At the end of the day, that's the most important training any golf course architect can have is, you know, learn for yourself what makes these golf courses good so that you can try to figure out how to do the same thing.
Yeah, for me, I just had a passion for golf and golf architecture from an early age, and I just got into I actually, you know, the games allow you to play around with, oh, how would I build a hole? What do I want it to look like? And then you don't get to do with that is you don't know all the technical constraints of building a real golf course. You know, you don't know about drainage, you don't know about, you know, walking between a green and the next tee, all kinds of stuff that you'll learn once you actually get into the business. But, and I would say in the very beginning, when you're passionate about something, just try to find out and learn as much about it as you can. And then for me, it was just matching up something I was really good with, which was technical skills. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do with that. And if you can match up something you're really good at with something you're really passionate about, I think that's a winning combination. And takes a little bit of luck too. You know, if Sand Valley had been built where I was lived, if Tom hadn't been hired to do the Lido job, who knows where I'd be right now. But you know, I kind of got lucky. I kind of fell into it a little bit. And if you're actively seeking it out, I think you can make it happen if you got those two things, skills and passion.
Oh, great. I think we'll wrap it up there for the questions. We are at 2:00. So Tom and Brian, thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. Jeff, thank you for hosting. And thank you to everyone who has joined and supported both the Golf Association joined today, and also thank you to Jackie and Amy for the support in having this run so smoothly. Last thank you to Greg Turner, who helped set today's program up and his efforts over the years to establish the Alumni Golfers Association. And the last thing, look out for an email from us on our upcoming global golf tournament. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.